After giving this some considerable thought, I have decided that it is now time for me to get rid of any non-stick cookware that I have been using. So over the past couple of months, I've been using this pan. This is actually a pretty good quality pan. This is a cast aluminum pan, real thick, real heavy. It has a ceramic non-stick coating, which I have liked a little bit better than the Teflon coatings or PTFE coatings. Those coatings seem to be looked at as being not so safe. If you get them too hot, they seem to let off a poisonous gas. There's a little less concern of safety with these ceramic coatings, but also they seem to have their drawbacks as well. But over the couple of months that I've owned this pan, I've noticed that the surface is already starting to lose some of its slick non-stickness. And also along the edge, there are some spots that the surface is starting to degrade and flake away. Now that's a point where I normally toss a pan, and I'm not happy about tossing a pan that I've only had for a couple of months. Now I bought this pan at a discount store. I paid about 15 bucks for it, which is what I normally do. I normally buy an inexpensive pan, whatever I can find that is the cheapest pan that I can get my hands on, and that's what this one was. But I think it's time to get rid of this. And after doing a lot of thinking, I have decided to go with a carbon steel pan. Now, carbon steel pans are not very popular here in North America, where I live, but I think that they should be, and I think that we should at least give them a try. Now, this pan is made in France, made by a company called De Beyer. I'm going to pronounce it the American way because I'm not exactly sure the correct pronunciation of the name, so I'm going to call it De Beyer. De Beyer is well known for making very good quality cookware. And this one in particular from De Beyer is a little bit hard to find here in North America. And this one is not really intended for home use. It's really more geared toward professional or restaurant use. And so the pan is actually extra thick. That means this is one heavy pan. But it also means that it's a pan that is not likely to warp. It's not likely to have any damage happen to it. And I think having an extra heavy pan means you're going to have a lot better even heat across the pan when you cook. And I think that's important for any type of pan, no matter what you buy. Now, carbon steel pans have a lot in common with cast iron pans in that the surface can rust and corrode if they're not seasoned, and they take a little bit of upkeep to keep them seasoned. But the important thing is the initial seasoning. Before you start to use one of these pans, you've really got to do a little bit of work and get it seasoned properly before you move on to cooking on it. And it's very similar to a cast iron pan. So my job here today is to get this pan seasoned up. Now, these carbon steel pans are coated with an oil from the factory to keep them from rusting in transit. So the first thing I did was I put some water in the pan, brought it up to a boil. I dumped that water out, and then I scrubbed the pan out with more hot water and lots of soap, and I scrubbed it as good and as thoroughly as I could to get all that manufacturing oil off the pan. And rinsed it off really well, and then I dried it really well with some paper towels. Once I got it as dry as I could and ensured that there was no more oil on the pan, I put the pan back on my stove to heat up. Now, this might be a good time to stop and talk about the seasoning process. This seems to be a contentious issue. A lot of people believe that there is one and only one way of seasoning a pan. And when we're talking about carbon steel pans, the seasoning is very similar to a cast iron pan. Everybody has their preferred method, and they think that that is the only method that should be used. And I am guilty of that myself. I've worked in the restaurant industry for 10 years. I've also been kind of a keen home cook for quite a long time, and so I've had kind of deep-seated opinions about how to season a pan properly. So you may not agree with how I'm seasoning this pan, and in the future we may find out that you're right and I'm wrong. But this is the method that I'm choosing to season. And one of the things that I like about these carbon steel pans versus a cast iron pan is that if I mess up the seasoning on this, I could quite easily take a scrubby pad, scrub this pan down, and start over again. I think re-seasoning a cast iron pan is a little more difficult, takes a little more work. So I think I'm fine with this method of seasoning. And if you have a different method, I'm glad it works for you, and I might use it in the future, but this is the way I'm doing it now. So this seasoning method that I'm using is quite simple, but a little bit tedious. What I've done here is I've heated up my pan on top of my stove until it got good and hot, and then I'm just adding a very thin layer of oil, this is sunflower oil, to the pan. And I do the best I can to get it spread out very well, and then I remove any excess oil that I possibly can with a dry paper towel, and then keep heating up the pan over the heat until the oil starts to smoke. Now this process turns the oil into a very stable polymer that bonds to the surface of the pan, giving the pan that non-stick-like surface. Now I repeated this process 3 times, and each time I would let the pan cool down completely before I applied the next layer of oil. And after this 3rd layer of oil, I decided the pan looked good enough to give it a good test. And what better way to test it than a fried egg? So I did notice that in the center of the pan was really non-stick. The egg would slide around quite easily. But I did have some sticking with both of the eggs that I cooked right in the corner of the pan. So that tells me my seasoning isn't quite ready yet, but also I think my cooking skill needs to improve quite a bit. So let's talk about positives and negatives using a carbon steel pan. Positive number 1 for me is they work on any cooking surface. So whether you've got a gas stove like I do, or an electric stove, whether that be a regular electric stove or a flat top, even an induction stove, these pans work well on. You can also use these pans out on a fire. If you're camping outside, you can actually use these over some coals, which is a big plus for me. Now a minus would be with this pan in particular. This pan has a coated steel handle, so you're not really supposed to use these pans in an oven. Now the weight and heft of this pan is another both positive and negative. Because this is such a heavy gauge pan, it means it's probably not going to warp no matter what cooking surface you put it on, no matter how hot you get it. This pan is unlikely to warp at any time, which means the pan is going to stay in good shape for a long time. The negative to that is this is a heavy pan to move around. Normally I can flip food quite easily. I had a little trouble flipping my food with this pan just because it is so hefty. So I have a really good feeling about this pan. I think as soon as I get my cooking level up to the level of this pan, I think it's going to be a really good tool for the future, and hopefully I won't have to keep buying and replacing nonstick pans. Hopefully this is the end of that cycle. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it.